linked in with government authority. A million institutions are linked. I mean, the medical industry. We make $1 gazillion selling these pharmaceuticals, and if somebody comes along and says, well, I have a remedy that's really cheap and seems to work really well, and they say, hey, government, can you outlaw that, please? I mean, the fact that there's actually been discussion of, we think you should need a doctor's prescription to have vitamin C. Those doctors are the guy at the front door. They are not there for your benefit if they want you to have their holy permission to get vitamin C. They are the enemy and they are the bad guy, and the only reason they're doing it is because there's a government there for them to use. And it's the same thing with medical institutions and a bunch of other things. I would draw the distinction between, there are private organizations, and here's something that people love to sort of muddle in their heads, like evil corporations. First of all, corporations are created by the state. There can still be big businesses, and they can still be run by greedy bastards, but in a free society, all they can do is offer to sell you something. And it's one thing that people get muddled in their head about is if some business comes along and says, I will pay you $1 a day to do 10 hours of hard manual labor, he's not oppressing you. If you can say no without him attacking you, he's not oppressing you. If you can't say no without him attacking you, he's government. And if all you have to do is say, no, that deal sucks, I'm not going to do that, then he is not oppressing you. He can be a greedy butthead, but he can't do anything to you if all he can do is give you an offer that you can say no. Now, again, that's an example of how big business will often, grab ties with government and control all the land in some country and say, you can either work for us or starve to death because you don't get any land and you don't get any of this and you don't get any of that. If the evil greedy businessman uses force to eliminate your other options and then gets you a bad deal, that's oppression. That's unjust. But if he just comes along and says, I have a really bad deal to offer you, well, what happens if I don't go for it? Nothing. Okay, and you're just kind of obnoxious, but you're not an oppressive. There's nothing immoral about that. You're just kind of considered, I don't want to play. So again, so many of even the secondary oppressions and injustices depend upon government power, or they don't even exist, even when the oppressor happens to be private, or appear private, like the big nasty corporations. Like I always say, take those big nasty corporations, take away their ties to government and see how big and nasty they are the next week, when they don't have this massive armed force of authoritarian thugs doing their bidding, when all they can do is offer to sell you something. And if they say, guess what, we own the whole continent just because you say so, and the only people say, no, you don't, you've been here, we live here, go away. Corporation goes, oh darn, we don't have an army, we just have. And even the private armies have to be authorized by government and have the cooperation and tolerance of government. Things like Blackwater and the nasty mercenaries. People say, well, what about them? I say, well, guess who they almost always work for? The government, who says, oh, you're allowed to go and terrorize these people, whether it's in this country or some other country. So often the injustices that even appear private to begin with, you follow the tentacles back and they come from government. Because without that, without the ability to violently dominate people, well, I'm sure if somebody offers me, if I can say no,
Don't you do currently live under the state or surrounded by people who have adopted the illusion of the state? What does the individual do when someone comes to the door, like one of their enforcers, one of their collection agents, one of their regulators? What recourse do we have in order to confront that? Civil disobedience, opting out? Is it just as simple as just stop participating and try to encourage other people to do likewise? What's our recourse?
Right. The question is basically, since we do live in a society where people do believe in government, and there is this big, powerful thing, because people will carry out its orders and enforce its will, what do we do? If you're the only one who gets that this isn't legitimate, well, the SWAT team at your front door probably want to have a nice discussion about it. What do we do in a world where there are people willing to commit oppression? And again, I would say the first step is an answer that everybody in the island scenario would understand. Like I use the example of, okay, we just found out the next island over, there's 30, 40 of us, there's 400 cannibals on the other island. They're headed over and they're going to eat us. They outnumber us, so maybe don't try democracy. That's not going to go too well. They'll just vote to eat us and then eat us. But what do we do about it? If we are outnumbered by the people who advocate violence, what do? The first thing is self-preservation isn't a sin. If the guy shows up at your door, if the choices are hand over some money or die, you might want to choose to hand over some money. Ultimately, the answer is changing the mentality of the people, and we don't get to the final answer to the problem until enough people understand that. In the meantime, everybody has the right of self-defense. And this is a thing I've written about and made videos about and horrified lots of people, because I've talked about the use of forcible defense against government aggressors who have a law that says they're allowed to. I made a video called When Should You Shoot a Cop, which freaked out tons of people. And it looks back in time and says, look through history how often the law enforcers were the ones committing mass murder. Now, do you really want to tell me that it's never okay to resist an aggressor as long as some politician wrote a law saying it was okay? What Mao did, what Stalin did, what Hitler did, what Pol Pot did, they legalized it first because they were authority. We're allowed to do this. Aha, here we come.
You forgot Obama.
And Obama and every other president in this country's history. So yeah, there is that problem that if you're the only one who knows you're free, it's going to be kind of dangerous. And you still have the right to defend yourself. And in certain cases, you might not want to, because self-preservation might be a better idea than dying in a blaze of glory. And that's the line that, my line in a few places, to do things that I will not let them do. I would forcibly resist even if it means I die. But I don't tell other people where to draw that line. I do tell people, if you haven't even thought about that line, or if you don't have a line, you are absolutely a slave. If they can do anything they want to you, and you will never resist, you're already a slave. Your line might be nowhere in line, but you better have a line, or you're already doomed. You won't ever be free because you don't even think you should be free, because you already think it's evil to defend yourself if the aggressor is lost. So, I just tell where my line is, but I do get people better have a line, or, you don't get free. Basically, if you're a slave who thinks you're supposed to be a slave, you will be a slave forever. And one of the things, one of the most amazing things I've ever read was the works of Frederick Douglass, who was a slave, and to me, the impressive thing was not that he physically escaped slavery, it was that he mentally escaped it. And to read his accounts of how a lot of the slaves were convinced that they were supposed to be slaves, and actually viewed runaway slaves as thieves for stealing themselves from the master. And those people go, how could anyone do that? And I say, do you take pride in being a law-abiding taxpayer? You have sworn for the people who try not to pay. Guess what? You're the slave who hates the other slave who tried to run away and used him as the thief for trying not to be robbed. It's still you. They changed the terminology, but they kept the lie, and you still fall for it. And when that lie goes away, and enough people do it, resisting is really easy. You ignore them. Until then, things are likely to get ugly. Because when a certain number of people are willing to stand up for the right, and a lot of people aren't, it usually ends in a violent conflict of one kind or another. And that's why what I focus on is trying to get people's minds to change, because that ugly thing that's going to happen in between, that's not going to be fun for anybody. I think the U.S. empire is falling. I think a lot of nasty things are going to happen. But ultimately, what I care about is what happens on the other side, and that depends entirely on how many people actually understand and want freedom. I don't care if they hate this particular regime. That doesn't matter the slightest to me. We've gone through cycles of regimes forever. What matters is when the cycle ends, is people choose freedom.
Oh, and last thing you guys, we hear him. The last thing you said, though, is like, that's why I think that we're still in the kind of education phase of trying to, if you took out government today, we'd just be back in the same boat,
Yes.
But what I was going to say is that a lot of those gray, in my experience, a lot of those gray area questions, about anarchism come from the fact that your earlier point, because everybody thinks, oh, well, anarchism, then everybody goes back to being cavemen or something. But how, what I guess I wanted to push maybe a question or statement, maybe I want to hear your voice on it, like how a lot of those problems get fixed with, like, voluntary economics, how big is that? But, everybody, not just economic being money, but just within trade and interaction with people. And so, what's your statement or, in a voice about what that is and how to explain it to people?
Right. I don't know that I can possibly paraphrase that. Anybody who wasn't here just doesn't get to know the question. Yeah, people have a lot of power even if they don't forcibly resist, even if, by just the way they treat other people, the way they trade, the way they spend their money, the way they live, even a minority of people can have a pretty big impact. And a few examples that come to mind is, I look forward to the day when nobody is comfortable being a tax collector because even just half of the people they meet think they're the root of all evil. Because if half the people you may think they're the root of all evil, you might consider a career change. And that's actually been a major problem for the IRS for decades, that it's really hard to keep your staff. They have a really fast turnover rate because they get the job and find out everybody hates them. And everybody should hate them. Because ostracizing thieves is a good thing. And again, even if they don't care morally, if they have to be faced every day in and day out with angry people being huffy about them and robbing them, or just people in general saying, "Ew, you work for the IRS, do this, you go over there, I don't want to have anything to do with you," that's very powerful. And same thing with cops or soldiers or any organization that uses the initiation of violence. If everyone around them condemns them, they feel a major pressure, whatever their own moral is, they feel a major pressure to stop doing that. And that's why I think it's really important, and there are certain things that are trained into us that the people in power know they have to really solidly train these certain things in. Like, of course I support the troops. I don't support the troops. If you're a soldier for any government, you're the bad guy, quit and go home. And the thing is, if everyone in the country said that, nobody would be in the U.S. military. It doesn't mean nobody would defend us, because if somebody invaded, I know lots and lots of people who aren't in the military who would say, well, I would definitely be one of the ones ready to forcibly defend against an actual invasion. But these are just religious things, and the way people are trained into nationalism and patriotism, they feel this deep, profound pride, because you have to train people into that to get them to keep going along with it. Because imagine if, and it's really sad, and I do feel for soldiers who have good intentions and go off and do it. And Vietnam was just a really, really sad testament to what authority does to all the good people. The people who went over, the people who protested, everybody involved. People go over, it's like, well, I thought I was going over to fight for freedom and justice or something or other, my country at least. I came back and everybody hated me. A bunch of evil stuff happened over there that I was not proud of. And the same thing with the Iraq War and every other war. And thankfully, there are now a lot of soldiers that come out and say, I joined up to do good stuff, and I figured out we're actually the bad guys. They're the bad guys too. We're not the only bad guys, but I don't think adding some more bad guys to the equation was really the answer. And I come back and a lot of people hate me, and that's kind of uncomfortable. And the suicide rate among soldiers is amazingly just horrible. And it isn't, and again, I offend people by saying this, but I don't care. I don't think it's because I saw really horrible things. If I saw something really horrible, my first thought is not, I'm going to kill myself. If I did something really horrible, my first thought would be, I should not be on this planet if I'm capable of that. And I believe a lot of military suicides are that. And I know a bunch of soldiers who say, yes, the suicides are because of that. You can see horrible things that can really mess you up and gross you out. You don't want to kill yourself because somebody else did something evil. You want to kill yourself because you did something evil. And it's a very, it's horrible that that happens at all. I love the fact that we now have the internet so that lots and lots of soldiers can come out and say, I joined up for good reasons. I thought we were the good guy. And then at one point I suddenly noticed, holy smokes, I'm that evil thing that the world needs protecting from. And so I quit. And, to any soldier, I would much rather that instead of killing yourself, you did the braver thing, which is come out and say, I was wrong. I was one of the bad guys, and I'm sorry, and I will never do that again, and I will try to talk other people out of doing that, of being soldiers, joining the military, being the police. That is a far braver thing than just taking your own life.